This is probably the bike that I haven't ridden very much at all. Alright, we're all filled up. We can go for a little bit of a ride. You know, the one thing you're going to be noticing right away is that this bike is very low to the ground. So that means that the seat height is extremely low. It's almost scooter-like. And another thing you're going to notice is that the seat is so wide, absolutely wide. You know, you see there's a cop over there. They're doing a lot of stuff here. The seat height is incredibly low and it's wide, so that means that you're going to have a lot of comfort on this thing. When you have a lot of comfort, that means you can ride for a while, but I don't even know the range on it. I imagine it's like over 200 miles, because even though it's got a small gas tank, it is very efficient. The NC700X got scooter-like mileage. It got, I believe, 65 miles to the gallon. And I believe that Honda did a good thing. They made it a very small gas tank, but they made it in such a way that it gets very good range, and that's a big plus. And I think that's one of the reasons I miss my NC700X. You know, even though like it was lacking, the NC700X had a lot of great things, but I think Honda could have improved it. You know, the gas tank, okay, it was good, it was in the rear. So this one, the gas tank is here. It's really annoying. It's in the front, I guess. I don't even know exactly, but it should be here. The gas tank on the NC was in the rear, and that made a lot of sense. But that also means you couldn't really use it as a storage, you know, thing, putting it on the rear seat. It was nice, but it does have its limitations. The NC is a much better commuter, I believe, than this, because you sit up higher and it's a lot easier to handle in very, like, it's very easy to handle like quick last minute sort of movements. This one, not so much. I think this bike is definitely for a different sort of audience. It is very easy to ride. It's just like you can throw it around relatively easily, but it does feel like it's a little bit harder. You know, like when you get on the Yamaha Super Tenere, and when you throw that thing around, you go like, oh, that's a very nimble bike. But on this, it just takes a little bit more effort. It's a leisure sort of ride, as opposed to a bike that you would get for really hitting those twisties. You know, hitting the twisties is really good, and for me, that's what I like. I like to kind of go around corners, you know, pop a quick wheelie once in a while. But this bike is just like you and your friends, you get together on the highway and you just go for a little bit of a spin. The bike does feel like a little bit of a chopper. You know, my Honda Shadow, the handlebars were like a little bit like further back, like almost like weird old school handlebars from a bicycle. This one, they're a little bit flatter, but they're very high up. And I think if you're coming from an adventure bike, it feels very odd. I never really got into the whole chopper movement. I don't understand those bikes. Why would you want a bike that handles like crap and doesn't have suspension in the rear? It's just, there are certain things that you want. And I think if you get this because you like the chopper look, you're much better off, because you're getting at least a very reliable bike, and it's very comfortable. You know, I haven't tested it with a passenger, but I bet it's pretty decently comfortable. It does have rubberized passenger foot pegs, but I don't know, I think I'd rather just remove them. I think riding with a passenger is highly overrated. It doesn't feel that good, kind of destroys the handling. But look at the seat. The seat is just so wide, that makes it very comfortable. And of course, with this hump, that means that your lower back is going to be held in a little bit better, but very decent. By the way, one thing I haven't showed you is where the placement for removing the rear seat is, and it's right over there. It's so hidden where my finger is, just incredibly hidden. I don't know why Honda decided to do it like that, but you know, of all the things, you know, they skipped out on a few things, but they did give you a very interesting package. The seat height is just really low. You know, I did ride this bike on the highway, and on the highway, I think that's where its home really is. It does feel good on the back roads, but every bike feels good on the back roads. Because, also keep in mind, this is not a good winter bike. It doesn't have a lot of protection. It doesn't have a good windscreen. And most bikes come with like just a little bit of a fairing, are going to help you. But this bike does feel like a really good bike for a beginner. If you're worried about, you know, it's a bike that's too fast, this thing is not fast. It's adequate, you know, like I don't think you'll have any issue if you get this and then like in 6 months you're like, oh, do I need to get a faster bike? Nope. With this bike, it feels like you will like this for the rest of your life. It's like they've given you a solid engine, and if anything, if they've given you anything, is a very reliable engine. You know, one thing you're going to notice too is that the clutch feel is very good. It's very easy to pull the clutch. So I think maybe perhaps this bike might be better for women because it's got such a low seat height. And I find that a lot of people are intimidated by the very high seat height of adventure bikes and the new crop of sport bikes. This bike could be 600 pounds and it still wouldn't matter because it's so low to the ground. The sound of it is really nice. It sounds really good for a inline 2. It sounds better than the CTX700 that I had by far. The NC sound like crap, but of course this bike stock is whisper quiet. But I guess like the people that do get these bikes, they like a little bit of a sound thing. It sounds really good when you crank it up. The chain is new. I mean, this thing is it's been barely ridden. It sounds pretty good. Full tank of gas. I'm not a real big fan of loud pipes, but I hear they save lives. I just don't know. It is nice. It does sound good. I don't think it exceeds any like sound policies and stuff like that. But as you can see, like the engine on this is not a typical engine. It's not a typical parallel twin. Normally the head of the engine would sit like this on most parallel twins. This is very far forward, and you can adjust the valves on it just by removing the radiator. You don't have to remove any of this. The CTX700 had the exact same engine, but the fuel tank on the NC was back there and the tailpiece. So this is a little bit different, but there are some strange things that this has. Like, you know, there's the ground wire there exposed, and I believe it's covered with the stock exhaust, but the previous owner removed it and I guess might have thrown it away. That is the starter. It's very easy to get to. That's the one thing I noticed about these new Honda parallel twins like this. They're very easy to maintain. They're very easy for home mechanics to work on. Everything about them is like very accessible. And I think the CTX700 just doesn't get enough due as a adventure bike because they kind of screwed up. They should have put like a 19-inch front wheel and a 17-inch rear to kind of compete with the V-Strom. But they didn't. They just kind of kept it a street bike. That's good for commuters. But the NC, I believe, is it's a better bike that suits me better because I'm not really into the cruising style. This is a great bike for whoever likes a chopper slash cruiser, and it sounds really good. I'm just going to turn it off. For me, I don't know, if I cruise, I like the SH150, and if I want to cruise, I prefer this thing. It's like an old school V-twin. I don't know. And look at this, the V-twin from Honda. It's got a shaft drive. That doesn't have a shaft drive. I really think that if you're going to make a cruiser, you got to like keep up with the demands of the cruiser riders. I know that's a budget bike, so it's got the shaft drive, but this was a budget bike at the time. They put a shaft drive on it. This is not a budget bike, this Super Tenere. I mean, look at it. It's massive. And getting in and out with this bag and everything, it's kind of difficult. So you have to keep that in mind. The reason people would get something like that, it's very easy to ride. This thing is intimidating for a new rider. Just by the sheer size of it, it's extremely intimidating. And I don't think a lot of people like that too much. You know, if I've heard people ask me, if I'm a new rider, do you think Super Tenere would make a great bike? And I don't think it's a great bike as a new rider. You know, this thing is, I think the problem is that with these Super Teneres, people will want to go off-road. And if you're a new rider and you're going off-road on something so big like this, it is a recipe for disaster. This thing weighs a ton. You have to be an extremely good dirt rider to ride this thing off-road. And even in those cases, these guys, they just drop the bikes, and it's very difficult to pick this thing up. Now, when you get on something like that as a new rider, you're not going to have any issues with that. You know, on this, just having a very tall bike is a little bit of an issue. Now, look at this. And here's another downside. I put a new tire. It's almost gone at the top. You know, I do a lot of commuting and stuff, but I think I only have 3,000 miles. So that tire is almost gone, but I think it was the cheaper tire, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I am going to dark side it. But yeah, this bike is a very good bike, but it really depends on who the type of rider. Like I like tall bikes. I like the ability to see over cars for commuting and touring. This is my sport touring bike. And what this is for me is definitely like a blast from the past. And it's so interesting looking. I love the Ascot. And the SH150, you know, if I didn't have any bike, I'd be happy with that. It does everything I want except the touring aspect of it. I can even go a little bit off-road. I just, I don't definitely like it for off-road riding. It's just a very economical, inexpensive bike to have, and you're not going to have any issues with it. I think of all of these here, that's a very good beginner bike. And of course the SH. But if you want to learn to shift, this is probably the bike to get. And they're relatively inexpensive, $4,000 to $5,000 used in the marketplace. And their engines are great. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video. Kind of stuck here. The cops won't bother me.